Okay, great. So we're going to do just a few slides here, and then Anil's going to take us through a demo of basically everything. So first, we're going to do a recap of integration service and a little bit of an overview. Anil has a few slides prepared to just help everyone understand what folder awareness and connection sharing really is. And then it's all about demo. Like Rohit said earlier, feel free to post your questions in the chat. And then we'll also try and reserve some time at the end to go through some questions live if anyone wants to ask some live questions, or we can answer them live. So just as an overview of integration service. So integration service, for those of you that may not already be aware, is a way to provide a capability to combine API-based automation with UI-based automation. Or if you'd prefer, you can create full API-based automations as well without having to do UI automation. So activities are provided in Studio from an API catalog so that an RPA developer can use the same tools and skills that they have for UI-based automation. They use those same tools and skills for API automation. So regardless of automation type. So it's supposed to make it very familiar without having to really understand those APIs in depth or be able to write code or parse JSON or any of those pieces. We see our customers run through API-based automations in a few common patterns. So one of those that is a little bit more traditional and quite common is where a lot of people start is the application to application or API to API based automation, where we're executing APIs between 1, 2, 3 or more systems. You'll see this a lot when you're moving data between systems, or you're doing data cleanup, or even just combining information from multiple systems into a single screen or single pane of glass. These are great areas to do API-based automation. Another one is document to API. So this is where you might combine document understanding and match that information from those documents to data that you have in backend systems. And rather than having to traverse through a UI to match that data, we can just make some very rapid API calls, combine that with that document information, do things like two-way match and three-way matches on invoices very quickly, and then write that information back to that external system. UI robot to API, this is that UI to API piece that I was mentioning, where we're combining those two pieces together, all in the same process. And then, of course, combining attended and unattended robots so that users that are running those attended automations, they could execute APIs. They may not even know that they're executing APIs, but they can do that through a secure manner. They can hand off to unattended robots that will execute APIs as well. And then human to API, where we're actually incorporating tasks and decision-making from people as part of executing those APIs before or after that part of the process. So to help facilitate this, integration service provides a number of capabilities. First and foremost is a large library of connectors so that you don't have to write code against all of these different systems that you might be looking to automate through APIs. Another is being able to centrally manage these connections. So manage the authentication for these in one single place for all of your connections. To date, if you were, before integration service, if you were looking to execute an API in a process, then you're managing that authentication within the process itself. When you're scaling to a large number of processes, you want a centralized place where you can manage those authentications and the user accounts and what systems you're going to be automating against, and integration service provides that. And then a really key part of this as well is triggers. So the ability to actually kick off automations based off of server-side events or changes in data, monitoring the data in those systems, polling for changes or receiving those changes a little bit more proactively so that you can kick off those processes instead of having a robot continuously monitoring that system. Integration service can do that for you and kick off those processes. And then with integration service, this isn't just about bringing APIs into the processes. This is about bringing API execution into all parts of the platform. So what we're doing is we're actually expanding integration service to make it available, make that API execution available through whichever product you're using, whether that's apps, Studio Desktop, Studio Web, whether it's Automation Hub, whether you're looking at it purely from a robots perspective. And we have more planned on the roadmap as well to make that kind of a centralized place where you're going to bring in these API executions. But most importantly, why everyone's here today, let's talk about the newest feature that we have for integration service, which is folder awareness and connection sharing. So Anil's going to take us through those pieces.
All right, thanks, Roy. Hello, everyone. I think everyone can hear me very clearly. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are from. I see like we have all three different parts of the continent over here or across the world. So very nice to meet everyone. So to start with, Roy, can we go to the next slide? So today we'll talk more about integration services, folder awareness, and connection sharing features that we released very recently for all of our users. So if you are an existing integration service user, you might have seen the difference already. So we'll dive deep into each of those features and we'll understand what we have done so far, what is the purpose, how those are more useful and profitable for being a customer, user, or RP developer. So we'll spend time like a minute or so to go over these features, like theoretically, and then we will jump into the demo where we can learn more about sharing the connections and how useful they are. So to start with, connection sharing basically enables the users to create, manage, and share the connections within the organization between users, groups, and you can use those shared connections to execute unattended or unattended pods. So the connections created within integration service are basically going to be available across multiple UiPath products. And that we will see in the demo, how we are going to create connections in integration services and how those are being used in other products of UiPath like Studio, Studio Desktop, Studio Web, and Assistant. There are other products that are already integrating with integration service to be more useful to have these connections. They'll be coming up in the near future. So all this is basically, we are trying to make the user experience more consistent and increase the overall productivity on how you can use the connections across the platform and execute your bots more easily, frequently, and with more profitability. For those familiar with Orchestrator, or at least like I've seen, like, okay, we have a good amount of users who are already a cloud users. So you might have already seen Orchestrator as part of your UiPath products. So integration service is basically leveraging the folder structure and the permission management from the Orchestrator. So we're going to see the demo of it, but it basically talks about how the folders are created in Orchestrator, how we manage the folders, and how we assign users to a particular folder. All those is still performed on the Orchestrator screen. How we are going to leverage that details into integration service is basically the feature that we revealed as folder awareness. So once the folders are created and available, then we will talk about how the connections are created within these folders, how those are separated between different workspaces, and how we are going to use them in the other applications is what we're going to see in the demo. Next screen. Okay, just to give a quick overview of what we are seeing on the agenda today. First, we will go over the folder creation and management process with an Orchestrator, as I told. Then we will see how the connections are created and how they are shared within integration service folders and how they are used across the platforms. And lastly, we'll go over the connections that are available at runtime. So we are creating the folders, we are creating the connections are shared. Now we'll also take a look at process execution timing, how these connections are so much value added when you are assigning these connections to attended or unattended bot, or maybe configurable at runtime kind of a thing. So with that, I'm not going to spend time on theoretical side of it. So let's jump on to the demo. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so what you're seeing here on screen is basically the not the landing page. Now you're seeing the landing page of Orchestrator. So as I said, we'll start with more of a folder management and permission management to start with. And to give a good example and good understanding of multiple users using shared connections, I created two users here. One is basically my personal account, which is basically UiPath account. And then I have another user created by myself using my another Gmail. So we will pull that as we need. To start with, I'll go with a very basic knowledge of folder creation. As you can see, I'm on Orchestrator and I have admin permissions, which is the only permission that will allow you to do certain functionalities of management. So when I go to the folders, as you can see, I have my workspace, which is basically a personal workspace created to manage my personal automations. And then I have the shared connections, IS shared connections folder, which is basically the shared folder that I created. So if you can see, I created like subfolders over here. So creating the folder is pretty straightforward. How we're doing right now in Orchestrator will follow the same, and then we can create the subfolders under that. So I created one folder and 3 subfolders, and then what I'm going to show you is basically how we assign the users. So if you can see, I have went to the subfolder of a product where I can see 3 users. So basically my self account, which is over here, and then 2 of the test accounts of my QA team. So I'm going to add another user, giving or expecting that the user will have permissions to this particular folder, only product, not the other one. So this is my other account, which I created using my Gmail. And as an admin, I'm basically assigning that user to have access to the product shared folder. So to make it easy for me, I will just assign the roles here and assign. So now as an admin, I can see, okay, this new person or the user is added to the folder. Now how that is going to look on the user 2 interface. So I'm bringing this other browser where I logged in. As you can see, this is the only workspace I have. I logged in and I'm at the integration service landing page. We'll talk about more of our integration service in a minute, but what I'm showing is basically the left navigation here, which is a new feature that we introduced. And as you can see, to start with, I have only my workspace, which is my personal workspace, which is expected to be used for my personal connections. Since I assigned the product shared folder to this particular user, I'm just refreshing, and as you can see, I have access to IS shared connections folder. But as I said, I gave only access to the product. So basically, I am managing which users can have access to which folders. So as you can see, I have access to the product folder. Okay, so now I'll jump into the connections in a bit, but I have one more thing to show on the Orchestrator. So this is basically where you manage all your permissions, roles, create the roles and everything. So as you can see, I can actually assign each folder to whatever the users or a group that I would like to have those permissions within the organization. So for a demo purpose, I'm restricting the user 2 to have access only to the product. The other thing that I would like to introduce, but not go into the details, is basically the roles. So as you can see, when I was assigning user permissions, I clicked certain roles like administrator, bot, and user. All those are basically coming from the roles that are created by the admin of your organization. As you can see here, I can create a new role at a tenant level or the folder level. And when I select a folder level, it will allow the admin to define the role, and it will allow the admin to select what kind of permissions they want to give within the assets of a particular folder, whether to access the connections, whether to access the jobs, logs, and everything. So this is basically what an admin would be managing it. So we're not going deep into like creating and all that, but that's basically a quick introduction on the folder structure. Now, the core purpose, let's jump into the integration service. So now I created folders. I assigned myself of all the hundreds of folders here. As you can see, I assigned myself as a user for these particular folders. And when I go to integration service, you should be able to see this left navigation, which is a new feature we introduced as a folder awareness. You can see my workspace, which is basically, as I said, personal connections, and then all the 3 subfolders that I have access to. Now, going to the next piece of it, which is basically connections. So when I click my workspace, I can see the whole catalog of integration services here, which is basically what Roy was mentioning about the rich catalog of all the connectors and the third-party vendors that you are able to connect right away. We don't need to write the code and everything, so it makes it easy. So I can go to the connections tab, which will show all the connections that I already established. So as you can see here, I just prepped for this webinar, and I created my personal connections to all the different connectors that I'm going to use here today, or at least some of them. So I can rename them however I want to make it more readable and easy to understand. I make everything very consistent with saying like, okay, my name, the connector name, and then the connection type, which is basically personal. So adding the connection is basically a basic functionality of integration services, and that didn't change with this feature, but I will give a quick demo of adding a connection in the other folder. Now, I've seen the connections in my personal workspace where I use my personal credentials. Now, when I go to example, the product shared folder, the expectation is all the users who got access to this particular subfolder will be able to see the connections. So as an admin or as a user, when you have a particular credential that you want to create a connection that everybody can share, this is where you can do it. So you come to the product folder, go to connections, add a connection, and that's basically I'm using the credential which I can be shared. That means like I can have unattended bots run through it, or attended bots run through it, or my other colleagues or the users who have access to the product folder is able to use this connection and build the automation. So just for the demo purpose, as I said, I'll show you the connection. So basically click add connection and then click the connector that you want to do. It will take you through the okay. I think I have been on this page for too long, all the way right. So let me get that there back. It will go through the authentication mechanism of whatever the third party you're connecting to. Since I already connected to my Outlook, it's going to ask me some easy questions just to check which connection I want to connect to. And then I should be able to see it here. So this is the connection I made. So I'm going to change it to the folder and then Outlook shared. So I'll show you why I renamed it in such a way. It will make my life easy when I'm using it in automation. So now, so as a user, one, I am able to create connections in a product folder and everything looks good. But let's talk about the user two. So as a user two, the expectation is when I go to my shared folder that I got access, I should be able to see everything what is just created by the user one. So as you can see here, this is the connection that we just created, and all the connections are basically created as a prep. So as a user two, I can build automations using all these connections that are available in my shared folder. Okay, that's basically where I'm creating a connection which can be shared with other users, and I'm putting it in a folder, and all the users who have access to the folder were able to see the connections that I just created. Okay, now, so that is how the connections are created. Now, just to continuing the same example. So I have other folders here, which is basically support, and I have only one connection here for ServiceNow. And as you can see, the other users, as you have seen, there is no access for the other user for the support folder. And for the engineering, I have only Gmail connected here. As you can see, the folder itself is not visible for the other user, so they can't access any of these connections that are intended to have engineering and support groups. So that is how you manage as an admin. First, you assign the users to a particular folders who need access to them, and then whoever creates the connections to particular folders are basically sharing the connections with other users of the same folder. But again, one last difference. Personal connections, I showed you like, okay, all these are basically the personal connections created. But if you see user two, I have only Gmail created here because it's personal workspace. That's only related to your personal credentials, and you need to create a connection using your personal credentials to make it available here. Okay, so now jumping to the third phase of our demo, which is basically talking about how these connections are used in automation. For that, I will take it in a two-phase wise. One is basically the Studio Desktop, and then we'll see how the processes in Studio Desktop are using these connections. And then we'll also take a look at Studio Web, and we'll see how Studio Web is able to use the connections in the project that we're building there. Okay, so I have, okay, so I created a automation process here. So today I'm not trying to build a use case or a logical business problem to solve. I'm more trying to show you the different connectors and how the connections are displayed here. So I'm going to publish the projects, but I'm not going to execute any of those because some of the accounts that I created are basically my test accounts and my personal accounts. So I don't want to use them to run any automation against them for now today. So, okay, so what I did here is basically a simple use case of using the Salesforce connector. When I have an opportunity closed out one, I'm going to get that Salesforce record, going to create an incident in ServiceNow and send an email to the user. So basically, I'm using 3 different connectors with 4 activities here. And as you can see, when I have the first trigger created here for Salesforce, as you can see here, the connection ID. And when I click here, as you can see, I can see 2 connections here. One is basically my personal. Since I'm logged in as myself, I can definitely see my personal connections. And I can see the shared connection that is available in product shared folder. In the same way, I can see here, it's the same because the same connector, Salesforce, I can see those 2. And when I connect to the ServiceNow, this is where basically I have 3. This is basically my personal, the product subfolder, and then the support subfolder. So since I have access to all those folders, I can be able to see all the connections available in that. And coming to the last one within this automation, I have a Gmail, my personal, as well as the engineering one, which is basically the engineering folder, and the product. So as a RP developer, it all depends on like what folders you have access to. For the demo, I just created access to all folders that is available for myself. But in the case of real world, there will be management happen, like okay, which folders you should be able to access and which connections you should be able to use within the particular folders and all that. So you should be able to select the connection that you want to use, and you should be able to publish this. So this particular automation, I already published it into the tenant workspace. So I'm not going to do it again, but I'm going to show you how I did it. So publish options, I'm going to publish it to the tenant level. This is basically shared workspace. So we'll see where that's going to be available in Orchestrator when we go to the Orchestrator back. So for the first one in Studio Web, we are going to do a shared workspace publish. And going to the second one, which is basically intended to show you the connections and then publish those connections onto your personal workspace. It should be up in a minute. Okay. So very similar concept here, but my intention is basically to use my personal connections here because I'm expecting this automation is I'm going to publish it for my personal purpose. It's a personal automation kind of a thing, so I will publish it in the personal workspace. So here, the sequence is like, okay, I created a trigger on my Gmail. So basically, when a new Gmail arrives, so I'm going to do it as a personal Gmail here. I'm going to download that email, and okay, that might be okay. So I'm going to download the email, and then I'm going to insert a record based on certain data that I'm getting in that email, right? And for that, I'm using Expensify, and I have 2 connections. I'm going to use my personal connection because I'm going to insert my expenses or whatever that's coming from the email into this Expensify account of mine. So this one, I publish basically on the personal workspace by selecting my personal workspace feed here. And I'm not going to go through that, but I will go through the Orchestrator to take a quick look at it. Now, before I jump into Orchestrator, I would like to show how this thing works in Studio Web. So now Studio Web is basically, I prepped some of the projects that I already created, so we'll go through that. So the first one is basically a project that's basically created very similar to the first one we have seen in Studio Desktop. I just want to set the resemblance between these two and show the connections, how they're going to be viewed. So I used the Salesforce connection very similarly, created an event trigger on the opportunities created. and then I'm going to get that record and insert that record into that, and then I'm going to send a Slack message, and then send an email. So it's basically want to show the diversity of different connectors, different activities, and how the connections are displayed in that area. So as you can see, there's no difference in the way the connections are presented to the user. What I mean is like, okay, when you have access to the shared folders and you have connections created in them, you should be able to see the exact list over here as well as to the desktop. And that's the expectation. We are moving forward, like wherever you see this functionality of sharing connections, they should be very identical and resembling the same exact behavior. So as you can see, the Salesforce here, the same connections available. And then ServiceNow, I have more than 2. So I have all the 3 displayed here, and then the Slack, only my personal and shared. As you can see here, I'm not displaying, or at least I'm not getting any details of the second user who created their personal Gmail account, which is a different ID. So as you can see here, there's no way I'm seeing any of the records that they created. So for Outlook example, so I created an Outlook personal, and this is the one I created when I was showing the connection screen, where I created a connection in the shared folder of product to name it like product Outlook shared. That's the reason I named it a certain way. It's easy for me to understand. So for the user 2, we have their personal workspace created and have a Gmail connection. But we haven't seen that Gmail connection anywhere in any of the connections, even though we use Gmail in our studio desktop. That's because it's their personal user 2. There's no way user 1 can access it without some configurations from the admin. Now, I'm not going to publish this, but this is how it looks when you use certain connectors and connection sharing in Studio Web. Going back, I can actually go to the other one. Here also, I'm going to use 2 projects. One is basically published to the shared workspace, and one is published to the personal workspace. So this is basically a personal workspace project, which is one of the things that I actually automated and use it. So whenever I get a new email coming in and it has certain conditions met, one of the conditions that I built is basically where the subject has confidence in it, because I get a lot of confidence alerts in my email, and I want to send a message to my Slack with that. So basically, I created a automation where whenever I get a new email and there is a confidence subject, subject has confidence in it, it will trigger a message to my confidence so that I don't miss that particular notification happening. And this is personal, so I want to use my personal connections here as well as my personal connection in my Slack, and I can publish it to the personal workspace. Now, let's go to Orchestrator, which is basically the third point of our agenda today, to see the process executions and how that is changed or evolved with the connection sharing. So as I was saying, I created 2 processes or 2 automations on Studio Desktop and 2 automations on Studio Web, and I published each one of them into a shared and personal workspace. So let's go to personal workspace first. So I'm on Orchestrator screen, and I'm in a personal workspace, and I'm going to processes. And these are the 2 that I just published. One is basically Studio Web personal, and the other one is basically, I didn't publish that one. Okay, that's an example. So I can do that. So first we will see this, which is basically the email with confidence and sending a message to Slack. So I'm going to edit it. So this is basically admin with permissions, of course, need to be here. And when I can schedule it, this is where you can see that I can schedule it in a way that I can select the shared connections. For example, I can use the product shared connection here and Slack connection here, and I can update it, and I can make it run with these connections and a trigger based or a time based or a queue based. So basically, it is giving us an additional opportunity or enhancing the capability that you can run your unattended attended bots using a shared connection instead of you creating like multiple tons of connections in your personal workspace. So, but our intention on this one is to basically having our basic configurable by users, which is allowing the users to configure their connections at the runtime. So I'm just going to update it. Okay, now coming to the shared one. So I hope everybody remembers that we published, or I said I published two projects, one from Studio Desktop and one from Studio Web onto the shared workspace. So those are here. So this is basically Studio Desktop shared connection demo, and the other one is basically Studio Web shared connection demo. So for both of them, the functionality, the behavior should be exactly the way you looked at the other one. It's just like I'm just demoing the things that you can see here. So if you can see here, I have my event trigger created on Salesforce, basically when I get the opportunity closed or one. And then I have my ServiceNow activity that I can use a connection, and then a Gmail. So being an admin, I can actually select or override the connections that is created by the RPA dev. So I can use support connection instead of the product, or I can use for Gmail, I want to use product Gmail because I want to notify everybody in the particular Gmail account of the product. And I can update it, and I can make it run based on the trigger, queues, or whatever the setup for the automation is done. It will execute in that way. It works exactly the same when you open the project that is published from the Studio Web. So the behavior on the orchestrator or the functionalities doesn't change depending on where you publish the project from, because the functionality resembles the same. So this particular functionality I want to talk about. So as you can see here, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Slack. Now coming to this one, as you can see, there is no permissions or missing connection. That's basically either the connection is broken, or this is basically there's no connections in that particular folder of a particular personal connection. So I'm going to share used. The other thing that you can do on every screen, wherever you're seeing the shared connection, is basically you can manage the connections or add a new connection if you don't have one. So that will just take you to the same authentication screen that you have seen when I'm adding a connection for Outlook, and it will allow you to create a connection, establish it, and use it. So this is basically what the new functionality with an orchestrator, you can call it the connection override. It will allow you to pick the connections that you, as an admin or as a user, you can have access to, and then you can update them in that aspect, and then they will be using those connections instead of what you are using right now, which is basically our complete personal connections that you create. So those are the three different things I want to talk about. Now, the last thing I would like to talk is basically Assistant. So I've seen a lot of users who already use UiPath. That's excellent. So you might have come across Assistant. The new functionality also incorporated into Assistant. That's what when I say we are integrating, or at least the integration service is basically integrating with all other UiPath products, which we already do. Now, connection sharing is also getting integrated. What I mean by that is basically, let's say example, this is one of the automations that is shared that needs to be run through the Assistant, because that's the intention of I publishing it through the Confluence and getting a Slack message. So using here, as you can see, when the connection is not based on the trigger, you should be able to use it right here. You can change it. But when the connection is based on a trigger, you can't change it here right away, but you can click the configure in browser, which will take you to the screen that will show you all the connections for the particular connectors of the particular project that you can change it here. And again, depending on the permissions that the user has, whether they can run automations on Assist, whether they can see the connections on Assist, whether those are shared in a particular folder, it all depends on what you have access. Since I am an admin on this account and I have available most of them except the user 2 connections, I can change it based on what I can available. So I'll just apply and just close it. And I go to Assist and I can run it. Take example of one of the projects that we published into the shared. As you can see, I have the Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Gmail, which is basically the automation that we developed on Studio Desktop. So here I can see all the connections I have for Gmail, for ServiceNow, and for the Salesforce. Since it has trigger based on it, you can't change it on this screen. You can change it on the browser. The other example I'm giving, if you can see here, I can see only my personal and the shared account, but I'm not able to see user 2 Gmail account, which is basically named like this. I'm not able to see it because that's the permission based. I cannot access their personal account or personal connections. So that is how the connection sharing is created and to be used across the platform. And folder awareness allows you to create folders and have access to particular folders where you can create the connections and use those connections in different places of the different UiPath products. So with that, I think with that, I end the demo today, and I will hand it over back to Roy.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Anil. Very comprehensive. I loved it. Let's pull some slides back up. Just as we wrap here, we're going to go into a Q&A portion here. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat here, and we will get to those.
Yeah, or I think we can also unmute and ask your questions. That's also fine. We have the time there.
Yep, that'd be great too. While everyone kind of regroups and thinks of any questions that they might have, for those of you that are interested in kind of getting a little bit more hands-on with integration service, of course you can go use that today if you're an Automation Cloud customer. But if it's very unfamiliar to you and you want something that's a little bit more hands-on led, we're actually going to do a dev dive session at the end of May, where we're going to spend the entire time actually going through and building a process with integration service. So we're going to use some of those out-of-the-box connectors from the catalog. We're going to stick in our OpenAI connector, and then we're actually going to build a custom connector to a custom API with Connector Builder and combine all those pieces together in a process. So if you'd like to see what that looks like, please join us for the session that you see on the screen at the end of May. There's a question around the license needed to use this. So connection sharing, is just part of integration service. So there's no specific license needed for it. All you need is integration service itself. And integration service is available to all Automation Cloud customers.
Exactly. So integration service is available to everyone on AC by default. One quick dependency recommendation is basically, since we are leveraging the Orchestrator folder structure and the management permissions, you need to enable Orchestrator to have the folder awareness and connection sharing available in integration service. So if you're not using Orchestrator, but you're intended to use integration service, that might pose some concerns because the folder awareness might not work. So Orchestrator is a dependency, so you need to enable it before you use integration service. Okay, any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I guess you did a good job covering everything, Anil.
That's what it looks like, but feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. I'm pretty sure once you start using it, there will be a lot of questions popping up. Feel free to reach out to us. Your contact to UiPath or basically directly to us, and we can definitely try to answer those.
Yeah, to Stanley's question right now, I'll just post the link here. So just give me a minute. So the recording for the session will be shared on this link in next 24 hours or so. Yeah. So feel free to share it with any of your colleagues, any of your peers who missed this session. I'm sure they will get a lot of value out of this.
Thanks a lot.
Yep. Any other questions before we wrap up? If you're shy, you can still post on chat. I guess not. In case you face any questions once you start using it, I have already shared the links to the profiles of Roy and Anil. So please do connect with them so that you're updated on not just the content so far, but even in future, any new updates that are coming in, you will hear a lot more about that from their updates. So Roy, Anil, maybe we can wrap the session now. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Charlie, for this amazing session. Thank you, everyone, for joining this
Thanks,
session.
everyone.
Please do join us for the dev dive session as well. So you can just scan the QR code and find more details about the series. All the past sessions that we have already conducted as part of dev dives, you'll find the recordings of those sessions on those links, and you can obviously register for the upcoming sessions as well. Thank you all for joining. I'm just quickly checking if there are any questions on the comment. That's all. Thank you. Perfect. I think Anil and Roy, great job.
Ahead.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Bye. Have a good
Bye.
day.